I want to welcome you very much to the channel. And probably we can get started with my first question that I normally ask is if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to our younger self, what would that be?
Well, first of all, good morning and great to see you. And thanks for the pleasure. Would I go back in time? I would say listen to what your gut tells you, believe in your talents that sometimes don't make sense from a linear point of view, but they'll all come in handy one day. So don't dismiss them. Don't put a monetary value on everything you're doing. And just believe that the right things will come along. It's not always very clear when we're starting out.
Okay, fantastic. Great. And if we can go back a little bit in
Mm,
time to your childhood or teenage memories,
okay.
can you walk me through a little bit? Um, your past, how it was back in the days, and yeah, just a little bit insight.
Okay, so it's a couple of segments there. I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Queens, New York, which is one of the five boroughs in New York City in a working class area by a university. And my neighborhood was full of people from other places, other immigrants, and I was the youngest in the group. So I learned a lot by listening to neighbors who were older. And I was quiet enough that I could sit next to them sometimes and just listen to how they were talking in the front of their house on what we call front stoops, the front steps. And it was fun. And they were almost like an extended family for me. I called them aunties and grandmothers, etc. Um, Childhood was interesting. It was quiet. I had a very strict family. My mother's from immigrated from France. Her family came from Poland. My father's first generation American from Lithuania. He came from a coal mining town and very strict, sometimes a lot of challenges. My mother came out of a war situation. Um, the world opened up for me quite a bit when I started to take dance classes at a local school with a teacher, a director who didn't believe in costumes and fancy money. He recruited teachers who had phenomenal backgrounds from all over the world because even though Queens wasn't fancy, he thought they deserved students like me deserved a cultural education. We had report cards. We didn't, it was no messing. I had a Russian ballet teacher, I had somebody who was a choreographer and taught was part of the Rockettes at one point. And those two people really changed my life because they convinced my mother I had potential, even though I was a really extremely shy kid who would just smile but not say anything. And they thought I should give commercials of all things a shot. And somehow, in the world of marketing, which I have no clue how I ever got recruited for this because my first commercial was Trident Gum. I had never done chewed gum until I went to an audition, swallowed it by the time I was done because it was a product that didn't make sense to me. Got the audition and had some funny experiences with that about being totally honest. During the show, I renamed the product during the filming because they had given me a speaking line. And I thought spearmint was such a serious flavor, and I didn't understand what that was. So I kept recommending that they call it peppermint until the director said, "We don't make that." So, and then I confessed to him as my first time, which is any actor and actress out there, you're not supposed to say you're a novice, but I was so proud. And then I was so naive on top of that that I thought this was my job that I had to show up for every day. So I was trying to figure out how am I going to work through first grade and showing up in the city. So, but there was good moments because what it made me was an observer. I saw how people worked really early and what the group dynamics, because one of the things about being shy, it doesn't mean you're not listening or if you're quiet, people sometimes say introverts, where do we bring value? We're listening and we're watching. Fast forward, lots of the latter part of grade school wasn't so great. There was tough bullying, there was a lot of sadness and things. And that actually taught me some very hard lessons about group dynamics. However, later on, as I edged towards my teenage years, I knew I had to teach myself how to have social skills. And one of the things I did to develop courage was questions. because I thought if I could be curious and ask questions, now I would learn things. And as an introvert knows, when you're asking questions, it also deflects the attention from yourself. So you get to listen and learn. But that skill set built a little bit of confidence about mixing with people. And then it became a skill later on in life. I used it for recruiting, I used it for with the work I do now in coaching and facilitating. And when I got to high school, I purposely picked a high school because I went to a private Catholic school. So I didn't go to public. I went to a private Catholic school. I was lucky enough to get into it. And I was very determined to find different tribes of people. And that's why I selected it, because it was big enough that you could mix it up a bit, and then small enough that you knew. Now, my graduating class was 678 kids, and I still remember that number because I was on the yearbook committee having to alphabetize everybody's names at the end of my 4 years. But slowly but surely, I found tribal members that I liked and could always feel more comfortable and learn my skills about what I brought to the party. And I had some very excellent, I have had excellent teachers that made a difference too along the way. So I'm totally grateful for them and the impact they made. I don't hear you. You muted yourself somehow, but that's okay. We all do that every
Hello.
day. Yeah,
Sorry.
now I hear you. So that's what happens when you
Sorry.
talk with your talk and think with your hands. You're destined to hit something, and I've got my hands away from the keyboard, so I'm like, stay away from the technical stuff. All right. So what was the question? It it looked interesting from your expression.
So, what were your defining moments or experiences that played a crucial role in shaping your identity or who you are today? Looking maybe at your teenage years.
Um, Going back to the childhood for a minute, because I was dancing, I believe in the arts for young people, no matter, to always find something you can express. Because even though I was going through tough times, I had music and dance as an outlet at important pieces. And that's a great way to express. And for some reason, I always liked connecting with the audience. And later on, I was very interested in teenage years of always, actually forever, cross cultural. If there was somebody from another nationality, I was always interested in what they were doing, how they got here, what they ate. And the good news about my school and where I was, we had people from all over the world. So I had a group of girlfriends who were from Cuba. They had their mothers had immigrated, and many of them had come over. So I learned a lot by sitting at their kitchen table and learning from them. So it was like a United Nations many times, which made it fun and interesting. Before there was a word diversity, we were kind of living it in some components of our school. So that was great.
Mhm. And in terms of what you envision to become and who you are today,
Mm.
how did that align in general? Was there a big difference between who you wanted to become and who you are today and what you're doing in general or throughout your career?
There's a scene I remember from grade school, and I had nuns, and sitting at the grade school desk, and they asked us to do exactly that. What do you want to be? So at the time, I wanted to be a performer on Broadway. So I had crayons of like stage lights, curtains, and everything. And I remember this is where influence of people around you kicked in a little bit. I looked and I had this performer, and she was great. And I looked around me. And every girl was drawing a nun. They were playing up to the teacher, and all of a sudden I'm like, this isn't going to be good. So I remember recasting that person as a nun, like underneath there was a dance costume. So it was a little bit of influence, but I think there was a little part of me that always wanted to be a performer and connect. And I knew once I did that, I could connect and make somebody laugh or smile and just feel that energy of either listening to them or seeing how they react to music or what we're sharing. So that was always in the background. I talked myself out of elements of that, but I always brought it back in my work later on. As you know from my bio, I started to do work later on with whether it was in retail for a while, um, kibitzing with customers, or when I went in house to be a HR person, which sounds really serious, but you can be entertaining if you put your mind to it. So I made my workshops and conversations entertaining, and slowly but surely, I found out that the stories and the way I was communicating was enjoyable, and people learned and they showed up and they were more transparent and they actually confessed everything they were doing wrong when they felt a little more comfortable and safe. So we were able to circumvent some major problems sometimes. So but it takes a long time to find. I realized it took me a long time to find the really core parts of my voice. I had to do some lots of trials and errors, and get some, how I can say, some templates out of my head that when you're grown up and you're doing things, everything has to be very left brain and logical. But the quirky bits actually have made the biggest difference in the good way.
Okay. So, in your opinion, on your own voice, would you say that the younger people are being pushed too soon to make a career decision or who they want to become?
Um, yes, for it really depends on the parents if or whoever they're guarding you. I think there should be a balance. I mean, especially in the States where school is so expensive, it's extraordinarily crazy expensive. It's really important that you go back and listen to what really drives your life. The question I grew up from immigrant parents was like, how, or my mother's immigrant, my father, it's like, how are you going to make money out of that? I think part of it is to hold on. How can you use this and how can this show up? And it's not always logical in the beginning, and try a lot of things that don't make sense sometimes, and take a lot of chances. So when you're on your career, some things that don't line up till later on, and you've realized that all those crazy bad jobs you took as a teenager in college. I'm great when I go to restaurants. I'm watching checkout clerks. There's people doing these god awful things that they look like they're just miserable. I'm always saying to one of those people, say, trust me, I'm a recruiter. I used to look for these moments that you worked in where you had to be resilient, that life wasn't tough. If you worked in food service, you knew the kitchen was going on fire on any given day, or customer is going to be bad. So just hold on to them. They will be used for something. You are learning a valuable skill, whether you realize it on your darkest, dreariest day, in that job or not. I had interviewed one guy, poor guy. He had been scanning in a dark room and out a window these files for like months on end. I was like, if anything I learned about you before I hire you is that you hung in there. So those are the things you have to keep in mind. You also have to have a sense of humor, and find good people around you that are working hard and finding things they love. Because if we listen to people who have really not listen to their own heart and be disappointed, that can really shade our own impression. So if it's not an actual human you're doing, read an autobiography, watch videos of people who, and learn their backstories, because nobody always has an easy path. They may be marketed and look like that, but there's always something to learn from other people's stories. So this is why this what you're doing here is fantastic.
Mhm. Okay, so you said people should, or younger people should deflect from negative surroundings in order to shape their own opinions and get inspired by people who actually achieved something, to get out the right direction, into the right direction in their career path or in the future or life in general. Is that what you would say normally?
Yes. When I say negative, I'm not saying not hearing practical and not having someone to lay out saying, this is what the playing field looks like. This is what it's going to take for you to get to from point A to point B. Listen, my husband came from Ireland and he is still a teacher and running a math department and coach. He, in a very small college that we went to, managed to coach somebody to the Olympics. Now, and it's in the Bronx. It's not this big fancy, like multi-acre school facilities and big gyms, but it was visioning what you could do. in what you do. So where people were, like I said, working in fancy facilities, his athlete was running up and down steps in the Bronx. Google the Bronx, lots of steps, like in a park, in a street. So figuring out what you could do to get the mindset change and what you had to do. And that athlete did not get a lot, got sponsorship, but unlike the mega stars, most athletes out there are working at the same time. So you have to figure out how and what is going to help get you to your dream and keep focused. And the negative is not bad. It's just if that becomes the overriding script, then that's you might be missing an opportunity. So find good people that can tell you how it is, and then how maybe you can get there.
Okay. A lot of young people using these social media channels to get inspired.
Ah,
And we
great.
all know that it's not necessarily always a positive
Mm-hmm.
place to get inspiration from, because we can see a lot of content that is produced where someone tells you you can become very quickly successful, rich, and you have to be good looking and wealthy in order to succeed in life or be
Mm-hmm.
seen as a powerful person. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of content floating like this. And at the same time, there's a group of people who are the haters. So if you try
Mm.
something, they kind of trying to put a shadow over you and
Mm-hmm.
trying to destroy your dreams or little steps that you're trying to take to achieve the things you would want to have in life.
Mm-hmm.
How would you say social media is influencing the younger generation in your own opinion? Is it a really good place to really get inspiration from, or do you think there could be something better or different where they could see the real importance of life, values, and not necessarily of materialistic things?
I think social media has mixed blessings. Look, we wouldn't have come together if we didn't have social media. It's offered platforms. We can travel. I use the expression story tourism. I've been able to meet people all over the world. However, think of it like you're doing research. There's a lot of different ways to do research, and I guide people to do what I always say: be curious. So not just live on the screens, not from an older person being critical. Like, I really mean it when I wrote in my book about we've turned into a heads down living in a bubble species. To use it for the good, find inspirational people that are there, not people who are saying like the 1-800 number, like, do this with $20, you're going to make 80 million by tonight, just follow my lead. That's wrong. Find the ones on the TED Talks that have really inspired people, and then go out and meet people. We have finally like lifted COVID, and there was a lot of restrictions. Find meetups, find places to go where people are having good conversations, because I said before, we didn't learn about others by being in a PowerPoint presentation. We learn by mixing up with people and hearing a diverse amount of opinions. So I feel like that should be the call to action for all of us, not just young people. Get curious, explore, explore different parts of your city if you have the means, but just listen to older people, like you're saying, listen to younger. And we need to, if something makes you uncomfortable, that should be an opportunity to learn to listen and say, why is making me uncomfortable? Sometimes when somebody's so hypercritical and negative, somebody broke their spirit. So keep that in mind and being empathetic and deflect. Deflect and say, I appreciate your answer, thank you for reflecting, and just let it go. Don't get into a diatribe back and forth, because that energy is just going to suck into you and it's going to stay with you. So find a good balance of people who have really strove and come up against a whole lot of hard things. Some of the most generous people I know have been the people who have gone through the most in their life, leaving countries, leaving wars, coming here, and they're the ones that always have that moment of a gift to me, to listen and be kind. And I think that's the biggest lessons I've learned. We always have something to give, no matter how tough our days get.
Mhm. And what would you say is the formula for a successful and fulfilling life, in your own opinion?
Um, Appreciate what's happening sometimes. And that sounds so new agey sometimes, but a couple years ago, I was dealing with a lot of elder care and moving my parents to a facility and literally emptying their house they had lived in for 60 years. And that was like an archaeology and anthropology experiment because I kept finding papers and books. And I was like I was like a teamster in New York. That's like the moving guy, the tough guy. And I would come out and I'd say, like, okay, I was a speaker a few months ago. Now I'm doing this. But looking for the gift was the lesson that came to me. Look at the lesson, look at the gift. This is going to come in handy one day. You're going to use this. So, again, the lesson is find good people. You don't need a lot. You don't need a whole hundreds, but reach out. Sometimes we're not in the best place. We're reluctant to do that. We say, I don't want to be the downer or but let people know that you're not in a good place sometimes. I think that's another thing I'm seeing with young people. The phone helps. I know that's not everyone's favorite mechanism, but you don't need to be camera ready. You can just get on the phone and listen to somebody's voice. So be that generous person for somebody else, and it'll come back to you as well.
Mhm. You mentioned your book. You published
Mm.
a book. Tell me
Yes.
about this. Tell me the story
Yes.
behind it. How did you come to publish a book, and what is it all about?
Okay. This is like where it's totally not logical because I had been doing speaking for a bit. I had been doing workshops about people skills and interviewing, and I had started to work at an association as an executive director virtually. And this one producer, and I was working 7 days a week, 24/7, doing events, membership, professional development programs. And this one person who was a marketing person, no bad things, kept asking me 7,000 questions when he called, and I didn't have all the data, and I kept saying we're such a small organization. So I went from trying to answer his questions, inviting him to an event. By the time we finished, I was like, I will pay you to come to the event if you. I didn't say if you stop crying, anything to move him off to the phone and into a forward action. So when he showed up I was chatting with him at this big economic event, I was like, you're going to meet this person, this person, this person, this, and then come back to me when you're done. I'll give you more people to meet. He looked at me and he said, you'd be a funny speaker. And I tried to explain. I said, that's what I was supposed to be doing all this time, but I'm running this association. So, in the craziest list of coincidences, he ran this conference. He was part of a sales team for this huge national conference that works with executives on supply chain, not low level executives who's writing a very nice check to come to this thing. I got invited and I thought, okay, we agreed that we're going to talk about this, the heads down, living in a bubble, not paying attention with digital communications. Except the gal who was organizing didn't give me a lot of information. She came out of reality TV. She was pretty chill. And she's like, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. It wasn't until a month or two later when I sat down with another colleague who had written a book at that time and was a big time speaker. And she invited me to breakfast and she goes, I want to hear what you're doing. We can talk about the event. And she gave you one of those looks, man. I'm sure we've all had at one point. But she listened. She listened and she went, hmm, did anyone explain what the event was like and where you will be presenting? And I was like, no, but I'm sure they're going to stick me down a hallway. It's going to be 150, 200 people. That's not much. I've done that. I can walk around the tables. I can chat, mix it up. And she goes, oh no, you're going to be on a stage, mega screens behind you, 500 executives looking up at you first thing in the morning. Well, I am not going to share the entire internal dialogue that happened from there. One of the sentences was like, be careful what you ask for because you asked for this. You wanted to be a speaker, you wanted to be funny and use humor. And after panicking for a while, for days of what I was going to do and how I was going to present for the audience, because that's like going from your school play to Broadway, 500 people. That's a whole different dialogue with the audience and what you can do and connect and how you can show things. The inner voice in me said, you got to keep it authentic. And that became the impetus of the group. I have to show up as I am because up to that point, I was worried about they're going to hear my New York accent and then my Queens accent. When I say EAs and THs, sometimes they go off skew. They're going to see a short little woman. They're going to see a middle-aged woman going, why is she here? What is she going to teach me? She doesn't have a huge bestseller. She didn't go on this, she doesn't have CEO titles. And what happened is I ended up doing a 40-minute stand-up routine about communications, about what gets us into trouble, why, and what we can do to get out of our own way. And my goal was to get everybody to look up. And at the end, my call to action in that speech was look up, have, we said earlier about Stoops, find moments to have in your space conversations, rather in your face interactions, because our culture was heating up at that time and it's only gotten more challenging. Now, speech was a success, did a bunch of other things at that conference that are other stories. And then time passed. And I kept saying, well, I have great pictures because I didn't have PowerPoint. I just had photos that were like my backup. Time passed and I had 64 saved drafts of the introduction because I tried to make the book super intellectual and I was going to do psychological terms. I was going to do handouts because I had the good fortune of having a few people have written books. So I was trying to imitate a little bit of what they were doing. And then I realized what worked on the stage wouldn't work on the page. Now, the other smart thing I did when I started to do this book is figure out what worked. And whether it's a conversation, a speech, or anything you're doing, what do I want to have a relationship with the audience or the reader? And I realized I had to capture a little bit of the energy that was on the stage and introduce them to me. So when you read the book, you will develop a Queen's accent because I have a glossary. I have some funny overviews of what it means to grow up in Queens. It's a crazy borough that doesn't make sense. We have a lot of characters that come from us. And then the second thing that was really helpful is I sought help because when COVID came and sorry, I just have to some cord here. Just we're going to take a pause for a second. My cord hitting my hand, and using my hand gestures, I knocked my cord out of the way. So we're keeping it real. Okay, we're good now. All right, I'm back. So in that moment of COVID, I had gathered one or two friends together virtually and talking about this book. And it ended up being one of these people was a journalist and an author. So he ended up being my editor. And he also gave me feedback on how to look at the book with a fresh eye. So one of the reasons the book got to the land of done is sought help, sought some expertise, and took advice too. And it's been a beautiful story about that, of who came and collaborated with me. So a little bit of a story there, but it's about listening to your voice, taking guidance, and trusting the message that I had about we all could benefit from coming together and stepping away from our assumptions about how we're talking with people and get out of our own way.
Great, great. And what motivates you to keep going when things get tough in life?
I think about people that I've known who have gone through incredible challenges, health-wise, life-wise, and I think that is. I also feel very appreciative of people who have been there for me, so that also pushes me on. I have a good husband who's been supportive. I've had friends who have believed in me, so I don't want to let them down. And I think I'm always inspired when I see people trying something and using all their talents to the most and working on that. So I think that's what always inspires me. I was always a voracious reader, and I encourage people to do that. Don't just read it on digital. Go get a book and make that your companion. Really do read. So that's what inspires me. Good stories, connections. This past Saturday, I was on a podcast with a colleague of mine who came from Nigeria, spent time in Ghana, immigrated here, became a Navy person, joined the Navy, I should say, and moved to Brooklyn, married a German woman. And at the end of the day, I met my ex-staff people. They met me in Brooklyn. So those things, the connection, of meeting people face to face and really sharing what's inspired them and what they're doing. So that energy of connection, I think, is the big inspiration for me, and finding joy and food when we can share it.
Great, great. Apart from recommending your book that you published, and you said just a few seconds ago, reading books could bring some value to your life. Any particular other books that you would recommend you've read in your life that you think that could be inspiring or teach someone something?
Animal Farm was a big book
George
that
Orwell,
always
very
stayed.
good one.
Yeah, the lessons of the group dynamics, um, of what was going on there. 1984, which sounded so futuristic when I read it, was another book about how groups and communities come together. Those are two. There's so many. There's so many. They're all around me here. And reading other people's competitive, it's so easy to say, um, oh, I want to be the only person doing this. I think as I've matured, it's collaborating with other people who are talking about the same things I have been. There's one thing I would recommend, and I am biased because I'm part of it. During COVID, the other project I kicked in was a person who is the CEO of Narrative. It's a storytelling group. And we were doing catch up conversations of like, okay, we can't go out and meet people. We can't do workshops. What are we doing? So we started something like this. We had some conversations at first, and I was like, well, why don't we talk to other people? And out of that became a podcast. And out of just talking to ourselves and maybe a few ex clients who were wonderful and interesting, I got bolder and saying, why not? Just like you found me. And I started to Google a variety of individuals. And it was the most amazing gift of time when they said yes. And they trusted us with their stories to show up and have a conversation. So earlier on, you asked me what social media does. Social media can brainwash you in thinking, you have to look a certain way, or the world is all bad. And God knows there is a lot of challenges. And I'm not being naive or deaf to what's happening. But we also have an opportunity to use our voice for good. And I think that's one of it. So there was a book I read as a child, and I wish somebody could tell me what the title is, because I read it around a tough time in what we call middle school, or seventh grade, eighth grade, end of grade school. And these kids were on a school trip, but somehow they ended up being in outer space with their professor and traveling to all these planets. But in order to get back to their home, they lost their way somehow. And the kid started to see, all these kids said that all these creatures start to attack them, and it was a crazy science fiction book, try to attack them and do things. And the kid in the story, the lead person, kept saying when he got angry, and the more angry he was and the more he wanted to hurt that person, the more creatures came. But when he switched to saying good things about his family and people and where he wanted to go, magically all the creatures went away. And I just remember saying that was such an interesting scene for, as a young child, to say, believe in the good. It might not be apparent right now, but believe in the good. So I've called libraries since then, and I'm like, does this sound familiar? Because it was that one scene that sometimes can help inspire you. And I'm curious about yours. See, I'm used to interviewing too. So I'm like, this is so hard. I want to flip the coin. So one book that stays in your mind. Play fair now. Come on.
Um, Animal Farm, as you said at the
Oh, really?
very beginning.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
that's what
Oh my gosh.
it clicked immediately. I've got it on my shelf. That's probably one of the first books I've read when I started reading seriously, and I think it's an amazing book. Really, very, very good book that everyone should read. I think very inspiring. Other than that, I like to read a lot of biographies,
Oh, you too. Me too.
successful people. My friends keep telling me read some science fiction
Mm-hmm.
novels or any other books, but I just love reading or hearing about successful people's successful people's stories. Not necessarily to get inspired to become rich, as I said before, because that's not the real meaning or
Hmm.
value of life, in my opinion. Uh, but I think it's very intriguing and interesting to see the dots connecting the journey from where they started and how they got to the place where they are right now, and the entire journey and how they experience everything. That's probably one of the things that actually motivates me or wants me to talk to older people, just to find out and tickle a little bit their brain and find out how life was for them and how it is now in comparison. So yeah, there are many books, and probably this is what leads me to one of the questions I also wanted to ask is, how would you say, because all the people always say my time was the best and your time is awful because you're spending time in front of technology, and some people see it as a positive, some as a negative. Would you say um, there are some great things from your past that you would want them to stay and be present today? Or would you say current times are fantastic and society should evolve and continue in the right direction, and everything is great?
There's a lot of times I've sat there and gone, oh, I should have gone back and changed things. I should have done this. If only I did. And it's true. Life would have taken on so many changes. And so I wish those couple of years never existed. However, at the end of the day, all those bits contributed to changes in who I met as a result, or how I look at things, or how I feel. So, whether it's good, bad, inspirational, they all help form me now. Now, what I do with it today is figuring out where I serve the best purpose for others and use my gifts, for the time, I'm given, and where I want to do my best work and trust my voice. And the reason I like storytelling, because books opened up my life and as a kid, it took me outside of my house, outside of situations, and I could hide and learn and see inspiration. So it was almost like a vitamin and a medicine. I always lean towards personal stories when I talk to people, or professional stories. Even as a kid, I was like, "What are you doing that?" That would be the one question I had courage to ask. And when we learn other people's stories, we learn context. We learn their why and how, and that exchange builds some trust. But it gives us this wealth of information. So I think that's one thing where, whether you're reading on an article, a legitimate article that, if you rather ebooks, just read and push yourself to explore outside topics. Like your friends are saying, come on, Matt, go read some science fiction. Well, you may be pleasantly surprised. The stories, the characters, Joseph Campbell, the one who wrote a lot about the art of storytelling, breakdown. There's always going to be the hero. There's always going to be something that changed. What happened? Spielberg has done, we all know, done all these science fiction, and others. No, there's a storyline, and there's got to be character development. So I think when we do what I said earlier about story tourism, and we travel outside of our world, it's a way of seeing other things with a fresh eye, so that person benefits, and we see ourselves and our situation with a fresh eye. When I started traveling as a young student with no money in a backpack, no, like, and taking a chance, I saw parts of me show up in different ways when I went abroad for the first time, and went, oh, okay. Now I feel comfortable in a strange place because I could recognize maybe some traits of how I grew up. So I think pushing yourself, whether it's another country or another neighborhood, um, just try to see things and show up in peculiar places. I think that's one of the good thing about exploring. Give yourself permission to try new things.
Hmm. Hmm. And is there a story from your life that you hold fond close to your heart that you could perhaps share and say this was probably one of the most impactful, positive, or great moments of my life, maybe?
It's it's as a little girl, like, we in that school I went to, there was a young teenager. At the time, I didn't realize I was 3 and 4, so I was I was allowed to go to with these classes because I was pretty well behaved. There was a young man that was attending the school who had a lot of talent with the same teacher I had, and his name is Ted Akris. And his aspiration was to be a Broadway dancer, which he did. And he was in the first cast of Hello Dolly on Broadway as one of the singing waiters, if you've ever seen the movie or the show. And then he took me to my first commercial audition, the one I didn't get, but I didn't care because I thought, oh, I'm going to marry him. This guy's great. He's taken me to the city, which was amazing. It was the first time I went someplace without my parent and just had this person. But he was such a nice young guy in the sense he was trustworthy. He was part of like a little family unit. And then when he went to Vietnam, he got recruited, and I knew what war was. I mean, I grew up and I knew it was not a joke. Got recruited to Vietnam, but fortunately, well, there's always a challenge there. He wasn't doing combat fight. He got recruited to the army, so he trained, but then he was part of the musical entertainment. But when he would write, he wrote religiously to me. His family used to complain that they weren't getting letters, but I always got letters. He would say like, oh, there's a platform of wood in the middle of the jungle and we're dancing and singing, at some point, and then we move on. Or they were doing some move like in the safer camps. And so it taught me a big lesson. First of all, he came back and he always didn't forget, and he just appreciated it. And then he went on to do more things. And then later in life, I found out, because we lost contact, that he took all those gifts and was very instrumental in working with youth in the next state over of New Jersey and doing performing arts. So the thing that lifted him up, he played forward as time went on. So looking, not just having gifts, but playing them forward and helping others, like you've been helped, I think is a good thing to think about. And like I said, we always have something to give.
Okay, great. And probably finally,
Hmm.
is there any wisdom or something that you would want to pass to the younger generation? Anything at all? Any
Be
wisdom?
gentle.
Any?
Be gentle. Listen to your heart. Ask for help. Um, Help each other, I think. And just, there are good people out there doing good things. Sometimes when we read the newspapers or certain types of newspapers, the negative sells copies. But if you go digging and searching, you will find amazing stories in your neighborhoods of people who do extraordinary things for others every day. Get creative. Listen to those teachers who are getting on your nerves sometimes because they're saying, do more, do more. Sometimes they mean really well. So I have to tell you, this coming weekend, I'll be seeing one of my first HR bosses ever, who used to push me to get on a stage or talk, and I'd be like, or run clubs, and I was be moaning to myself, like, why? Why? Leave me alone. And you know what? She was right. Take a chance. So when you see, when you have somebody who sees something in you, and it's going to make you uncomfortable, mm, sometimes take a chance and do it. You might find you're surprised that it was the thing you wanted to do or could do, and you never thought it was possible. So enjoy finding your possibilities. That's the gift. And,
Mhm.
keep sharing your stories too and learn how to do that.
Great. All right, Julienne. So I think that's it. I really wanted to thank you for your time,
Yes, thank
and
you.
I hope we got to speak again.
Yes, thank you. And I love being a time traveler and traveling to the UK and you to New York here today. So, what a wonderful way to start the week. So, thank you. All the best. Stay safe, stay well, stay inspired.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.